Dave and I are part of Weber Shandwick. Weber Shandwick is a global communications company, but our Twin Cities office has its roots in the local one-man shop that Dave founded 32 years ago, and from which he retired 3 years ago. But just one piece of information for everybody: we still have some dibs on his time. At our offices, especially as we began to think about Dave retiring, we became fond of saying, if Dave Mona didn't exist, Minnesota would have had to invent him. Why? Because no one has on speed dial more people, more worthy causes, and more companies than Dave. His CV, if you just looked at it on paper, is the picture of a smart, connected power broker who brings people together to make very big things happen. But then you meet Dave, and the portrait gets deeper and richer and more textured. Dave's kind, he's optimistic, he's the real definition of a family guy, he's pragmatic, he's ethical, he exercises enormously good judgment. It's almost like he knows how to see behind the corners, really, and we've counted on that a lot. Dave's dad was a civics teacher and a coach. His mom was an English teacher. And in many ways, I've thought about this often, those priorities translate into the 10 poles that define Dave as a business and community leader. Civics goes to the heart of Dave's enduring sense of community. His energy, time, resources, ideas have made a huge difference for many, many organizations: University of Minnesota, the Chamber, Vocal Essence, and so many more. When we formed Mona Meyer McGrath and Gavin, one of the things we did very early on was build out a disciplined, committed pro bono program. And that program, which happened in part under Dave's leadership, has been replicated across our entire system at Weber Shandwick. 80-some offices around the world use our model of community commitment to convey how to connect with community. Dave was the son of a coach. And I think for many of you, he may be best known for playing kind of a starring role in the local sports scene. Most audibly, he's the informed, and I like to think temperate voice of CCO's Sunday morning sports huddle, and has been for more than 30 years. Bill, it's the only time I change frequency. But as you saw in the video, Dave's also been a player behind the scenes in sports too, and it's almost always been under kind of the rubric of how do we bring something good to Minnesota, as in the Super Bowl, as in the Final Four, and with his wife Linda, as in the U.S. Women's Golf Championship. And of course, being the son of an English teacher, that may be the trace for Dave's brilliance as a storyteller, as a wordsmith, as a speaker, and as an author. But the recessive gene, the one that didn't necessarily show up early on, was the one tagged entrepreneur. So as we heard in the video, Dave began his professional life. He was a writer, a sports editor. He worked for the Minnesota Daily, for Dave Moore's Bedtime News. He reported for the Minneapolis Tribune. He looked to the private sector for communications jobs, and he worked for a number of respected companies, including one where, coincidentally, he worked for my dad. So I began to hear about Dave Mona long before I had the privilege of meeting him. You saw in the video that he hit the big time as VP of Communications for the Toro Company. But after 2 years in which no snow fell anywhere in North America, he had the unusual and perhaps unique career experience of writing a news release about his own layoff. But when you talk to Dave about that moment, he's much more blunt. He says, "I was fired, penniless, and out of work." And that was when the optimism kicked in. That was when the worth ethic began to show itself in really meaningful ways, and that was in the belief in self showed itself. So Dave founded a public relations firm here in the Twin Cities, David L. Mona and Associates. He's fond of saying he had no associates, but he had Linda. And I will note that that was, I think, much of the secret of his success. It grew. The addition of other partners created Mona Meyer McGrath and Gavin. We became part of Weber Shandwick to be able to bring our clients broader reach, deeper competencies, a geography that transcended the Twin Cities. And today, the firm that Dave founded is the largest public relations firm company in our market, and our office is one of the top 5 top 5 offices in our global company. So Dave and I talk a lot about what matters and how we feel about our work and how we feel about our company. And I think this son of teachers and once laid off guy would say that he's extremely proud of the remarkable work we do for our clients. He's extremely proud about the clients that we work with. But as you saw in the video, he seems to draw his greatest satisfaction that in the 3 decades, we've hired, developed, grown, and launched an amazing group of inventive and accomplished professionals. And a lot of them are in this room. Some of them left and went on to career trajectories of their own. Some of them stayed and grew. I'm one of them. And it is with great pride and affection that I introduce my colleague and friend, Dave Mona.
Wow. Thanks so much, Sarah, not only for the introduction, but for your friendship and your partnership all these years. I have a confession to make. I almost didn't get here. The day before I got the email announcing this, I got another email that I had been named to the who's who of distinguished right-handed Americans. So when I got the email that said, "Congratulations, you've been selected," I almost deleted it, but I read to the next line, and I'm very grateful to the selection committee and Twin Cities Business for bestowing this honor upon me. I do want to recognize some of the people who are here, some of whom Sarah already mentioned. My wife, Linda, we started dating 49 years ago this fall. I have to admit, we went to the Roosevelt-Washburn football game and then to dinner at Beek's Pizza. So I'm a lifer here in the Twin Cities, but we've been married 45 years, and Linda was the associate back in the days of David Almona and Associates. With Linda here tonight is my mother-in-law, Joy Brecky, who will celebrate her 100th birthday 498 days from today. So. Also, my sons Eric and Kirk's wife Chelsea. Sarah mentioned my boss, her dad, Quinn Heppus, the best boss I ever had, and I had the honor of sitting next to Quinn again here tonight. And Quinn, thank you so much. I'm not sure I've ever said thank you enough for all you did for me. He's not the one who fired me. That came later. And then my partners over the years at Mona Meyer McGrath and Gavin, and more recently Weber Shandwick. In addition to Sarah, you saw Dennis McGrath's picture up there, Dennis, my first partner. And then the story about the Coke machine. The outcome of the Coke machine is we went out and recruited Mary Jeffries to the firm. One of the best decisions we ever made, even though if you read the story, we had to get used to somebody telling us no when we wanted to spend money. But that was a valuable lesson, and Mary, we appreciate that, despite some of the nicknames we called you, which are also in the story. Several years ago, it occurred to me that I've had the unique privilege of working with some really remarkable people in the Twin Cities. I'm going to reference only 2 of them and just a little of the takeaway, what I've learned from them. First of all, Dave Moore. As a student at the University of Minnesota, out of work, my mother said to me, you might want to ask those people to give you that nice scholarship at WCCO TV if there's a job. So I went down there. Turned out somebody had resigned the day before. I was hired as a dispatcher, and then about 3 months into that, someone from the ad department ventured into the news department, which rarely ever happened. And this person was so excited, and he was excited because he had sold the bedtime news, the sponsorship of the bedtime news. The bedtime news was an invention of Dave Moore's. It was about 2.5 minutes long at the time. The person had sold the Sealy Mattress Company 2 one-minute ads, an open and a close. He thought that Dave Moore would be delighted, and I could overhear Dave when he was told about it. Dave said, "Have you ever seen the bedtime news?" And the salesperson said, "No, but I hear it's a wonderful show." And Dave said, "It's 2.5 minutes long. You just sold 2 one-minute spots, an intro and a close into a show that's 2.5 minutes long. I'm going to ask him to drop the bedtime news." And Joe Bartlemy, the news director, said, "Dave, I think we can get you some help." So he looked around the newsroom for anybody who would give up every Saturday night. He wasn't making any eye contact. And he found me, a student in journalism, and he called me over and he offered me the job. And I remember I was making $1.50 at the time in a very low voice. There were no private offices in the newsroom. Joe said, "We don't expect you to do the bedtime news for $1.50 an hour. So during that time that you work on the bedtime news, we'll pay you $1.75 an hour." And then he said, "And I appreciate it if you wouldn't mention it to the other guys." And I remember saying, "Joe, don't worry, I'm as embarrassed about it as you are." So I had the chance for 3 years to be the editor of the Bedtime News, working with Dave Moore, one of the most remarkable human beings I've ever met. And where the story is going is that in working with Dave, I had a chance to often walk the streets of Minneapolis with him. And I think in those days, with the possible exception of Hubert Humphrey, he might have been the most recognizable person in the state of Minnesota. That position, of course, now occupied by Frank. But time and again, people would come up to Dave Moore and they'd say, "Oh, Mr. Moore, I admire you so much." And Dave would stop them right there and he'd say, "Admire?" He said, "If you're telling me you watch me rather than John McDougal," sorry, Stan, he said, I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. But if you're telling me you admire me," he said, "I have to be honest with you, I read words that other people write for me. And if you want to admire somebody, you should admire a cop or a school teacher or a firefighter because they actually do something." I'm 19 years old walking next to this iconic figure, and I said, wow, has he ever got it figured out? It wasn't about him, it was about people who made a difference and his aspiration to become one of those people and his admiration for people that he saw in that. The other person I just want to mention briefly passed away last year, and that was Harmon Killebrew. When I had the opportunity to cover the Twins baseball team as a young writer for the Tribune, I went down to Orlando, Florida, and Tinker Field. Didn't know anybody there. I was standing on the dugout step, and out of the dugout walked Harmon Killebrew, the most recognizable member of the Minnesota Twins, put his hand out and said, "Hi, I'm Harmon Killebrew. You must be the new guy covering us for the Tribune." I mean, like I didn't know who Harmon Killebrew was, but I liked him right away, and as I watched the Twins take practice, I noticed if any of you played baseball, you know the baseball routine is during batting practice, you take 6 swings and a bunt. And I watched Harmon, and Harmon took 7 swings, and it was obvious that he did something different from everyone else. And I pointed it out, I said, "Harmon, how come you take 7 swings and everybody else takes 6 and a bunt?" Harmon said, "Mr. Griffith pays me to hit home runs." And I thought about that, but kind of put it away, and Linda and I were at a conference one day, and the speaker was talking, and I'll never forget what he said. He said, "So often we take people and try to improve their weaknesses." And he said, "You know, if you do that, you'll be surrounded by a lot of people with strong weaknesses." He said we should recognize the strengths in people, why we hired them in the first place, and then create opportunities for them to use those strengths. So with that in mind, Linda and I looked at each other and I said, "Harmon Killebrew." So I went home that night and I looked up Harmon's major league record, 9,991 plate appearances. Anybody want to guess how many sacrifice bunts Harmon Killebrew had and 9,991 plate appearances? Not a single one. Well, then finally, what I'm proud of, I remember before starting the business, I was scared stiff. As Sarah said, there was no entrepreneurial history in the family going back to the 500 years of recorded history we've been able to track. So there was a slight doubt in my mind that this might not work. And I had lunch with a guy I didn't know, but I'd read about, named Pat Fallon, and we went to Matt's Bar, home of the Juicy Lucy. And on a napkin, we sort of drew out what we had in mind. And Pat and I had the same frustration. We saw great creative work being done in this market, but people were under the impression that to get truly important advertising or public relations representation, you needed to go to New York. And we said, you know, if things work out right, at some point in time, we'll be able to get recognition for people in this community for the quality of work that they historically have done and will do here in the future. And those things have completely changed over the years, and I'm so proud of that. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, he'll ask on Sunday morning, "Did you mention me?" So I don't want to disappoint him. When I lost my job and I didn't know if the PR firm would work, I was looking for a back door. And I did an audition tape at WCCO Radio, thinking that nothing would ever happen. And then one day, about 3 weeks later, I got a phone call on a Thursday from the program director, and he said, "You know, do you ever listen to that funny show on Sunday morning with Sid Hartman and Chuck Lilligren?" And I said, "You mean the Sports Huddle?" And he said, "Yeah, that's the one." It was on from 10:05 to 10:30 at the time. I said, "Yeah, I listen to it every week. Why?" He said, "Do you think you could do that show?" I got excited because I thought Sid was leaving, but it turned out it was Lilligren who was leaving. So I said, "Yeah, I think so." And I went there the next Sunday and expecting a pep talk from Sid. Right as the red light went on, he said, "No offense to you, Dave, I don't think this is going to work. I'm going to ask him to cancel the show." Over the 32 years, he's mellowed slightly, but I did want to close with one Sid Hartman story, probably my favorite. About 5 years ago, I decided to write a book, and I knew I needed to start taking notes and writing down some Sid stories. We were interviewing or doing a radio interview with Tim Cheetah, which name may be familiar to you. Tim at the time was an American League umpire, and the topic in baseball was the merging of the American and National League umpires. And Tim is a great interview guest. He's everything Sid hates in a guest. He's articulate, long-winded, and I could see Sid was, after about 20 seconds, was ready to interrupt Tim Cheetah. I know that comes as a surprise to those of you who listen that he would interrupt anybody. But finally, he just blurted out, "Cheetah." And Tim stopped. He said, "Yes." And Sid said, "Isn't the problem with the umpires their lack of inconsistency?" So I wrote that down, and on Monday I sent it to Sports Illustrated. A friend of mine there who I'd worked with at the Tribune, phone call came, and he said, "I got your email. We're dropping something out of the magazine. It'll be in the magazine this Friday. We're doing a feature on umpires and the strike zone." So the next Sunday, armed with my Sports Illustrated, I came in. I said, "Hey, Sid, you made Sports Illustrated." "I did?" I said, "Yeah, you did. What about?" I said, "Remember the Tim Cheetah interview?" "Yeah, what about it?" I said, "Well, here's your quote. Isn't the problem with you umpires your lack of inconsistency?" He looked at me and said, "Yeah." So over the last dozen years or so, we have shared many speaking platforms. I tell that story every time. About 2 years ago, when walking out of the auditorium, Sid said, "Can I ask you a personal question?" I said, "Sure, ask me anything you want." He said, "How come everybody laughs at the Tim Cheetah story?" I said, "Sid, I think people just find umpires inherently interesting people." Thanks so much for this recognition. I so much appreciate it.